Okay, so again, thank you so much for taking the time to partner with us, to come with us today. We're going to just kind of do an overview of field supervision. Some of you may be new to this. Some of you may have done this many times. If you've seen me do this training before, we try to do this every a few times a year to hit kind of all the new starts. So some of this content may be a repeat if you've been with us before. Again, we try to do a big overview. Feel free to add questions in the chat, raise your hand. Jamie's going to help me out in the chat. So if you have questions, we'll try to get them there. And again, as this is an overview, I'm just going to kind of go over a lot of content. So moving along, our learning objectives today, really looking at kind of understanding requirements of supervising WVU social work interns, then exploring some educational supervision techniques, looking at best practices in supervision of students, and looking at some strategies for incorporating the code of ethics into our supervisory styles. And so I really see this training, kind of the first portion, we spend a little bit more on kind of some of the logistics and what it looks like at WVU in our programs. And then we kind of branch out more and talk about just kind of best practices in general when we're looking at supervising interns. I have a kind of a table of contents here. We will share these slides afterwards. And so feel free, if you're back here looking for something specific, this is just really meant to help guide you through the slideshow. So, to kind of frame everything that we're going to talk about today, field education is the signature pedagogy in social work, as designated by our Council on Social Work Education. And really this means that, in social work education, we see this field experience as equal in standing and as our coursework. So this is an applied degree. We want our students to not just learn what we're teaching them in the classroom, but see what it looks like in the real world. And that really means that you, as our community educators, are as essential as we are as faculty. And so I cannot say enough how much we value your partnership and how important your role is. I think when many of you think back to field experiences you may have had during social work education, you'll probably think of them as the most memorable part of your education. They are going to remember you as their field instructors, maybe more than they remember us as their faculty, and what they do and what they experience out there in your agencies, again, is going to really shape them. So again, this is a really essential part of our program. So as we look at supervision, we really kind of see these three components, and I'll try to kind of frame many of the things we talk about today across these three components. And so the administrative side of supervision is kind of the most obvious part of supervision. So we look at the logistics, we train, we talk about when are you going to be there and what does the schedule look like and what forms do you fill out. So a lot of the kind of how-to and logistical piece. And this part usually happens because if it doesn't, people don't know what to do, it becomes a problem. And so again, that's kind of like the obvious part of supervision. Then looking at this supportive part of supervision, we're pretty good at this as social workers. We're heavily focused on relationships. And so this supportive supervision really does kind of frame itself around relationships, helping students kind of looking at how are they experiencing the internship? How are they managing their self-care? Some of this kind of mentoring and addressing concerns that they have. So again, this kind of partnering with them along the way. Then we look at this educational piece of supervision, which is really crucial to our social work internship supervision, but it is the most likely piece to be skipped because you have to be intentional. And this really takes kind of equal work from students and field instructors to kind of push on this educational, especially for our students. They might not understand that this is a part of supervision, this kind of learning push here. And so this is where, again, I will talk throughout the training about things that you can really do to help push on the educational side of supervision. There are things you can do like choosing a topic for each supervision session, having the student choose a topic, having them bring things from their class content that they're seeing in the internship. So we'll continue to talk about that more, but that's a big goal for your supervision, is to really make sure that throughout the time you're supervising a student that you're kind of covering all three of those wheels of supervision. So again, just to kind of review some of the logistics here, And I won't spend a lot of time on this portion. I know that many of you are getting ready to host students either this summer or this fall, so you've already been kind of through this, but just so everybody has a good understanding, we only have 3 levels of internships. So we have BSW students. Currently, these students are all on campus, but next year, so not the 25-26 year, but the 26-27 year, we will have online BSW students. So for those of you that are, throughout the state, considering that in the future there might be opportunities to have BSW students as well. So our bachelor's level students, they complete a 400-hour internship, typically between this October and April period of time, and they're going to do these generalist social work activities. So the next internship level really focuses on a lot of the same learning. So the competencies are still kind of these foundation level generalists, but these are our first year grad students. So our MSW students that have an undergraduate degree in anything other than social work are going to complete this foundation level internship as well. So our part-time students, and again, I know many of you are getting ready to take on part-time online foundation level MSW students that start next week. Not all of you in this room, but many. So that's kind of that level, is that MSW generalist. They start this program. Again, if they're part-time in the summer between their in their second and third year. So they're going to do a 300-hour placement either between June and December, or if they're full-time students, then they'll do that in December, or in October, more like our BSW. So that kind of October to April. So we've got all these different kind of timelines playing out here. Then we have our MSW advanced level students. So these are our last year MSW students. So all of our MSW students will do an MSW advanced placement if they have an undergraduate degree in something other than social work. They do that foundation and then the advanced. So this is a 600-hour internship that they do throughout the entire academic year. So August all the way through July if they're on the part-time program, or August through April if they're on the full-time program. And so then they're kind of doing elevated activities. We expect them to be working a little bit more independently, a little bit more in depth. They're there for that 600 hours. They're there a little bit more each week. They've taken clinical courses so they can kind of, again, elevate to that next level of competencies. This grid, this is not a super clear picture for all of you, but we will share this in our handout so you have reference to these details. But this is just kind of a grid that kind of goes through each of these cohorts of students and when they're in field and which things are due when. So again, this is more of a reference document that we'll make sure that you have. Which reminds me, Jamie's got that. Yep, you've got that. And then I also have a handout for you all to have. So just put that in the chat as well. So we'll share these things with you throughout. So next, kind of going through the support roles. So who are the people that support our interns throughout their placement? And so there's the field instructor. So this is their social work supervisor. So this is many of you, although I know some of you are likely site supervisors as well. So we'll talk about both of these. The field instructor is the person with a social work degree. So either a BSW or MSW degree. That requirement depends on the level of the student. They need to receive at least an hour a week of this kind of educationally focused supervision from their social work field instructor every week throughout the internship. So this person often works where the student is placed, but sometimes they're external to the site. So some students will have a site supervisor. And so this is a person who doesn't necessarily have a social work role, but works at the agency where the student is placed and is able to kind of oversee those day-to-day tasks. The more guides and mentors our students have to learn from, the better. Then we have the faculty field liaison. And so these terms all get confused a lot, and we'll continue to remind students and clarify this. The faculty field liaison, these are our WVU faculty. So this might be Jamie, Savannah, or myself, but sometimes there are other faculty that play this role as well. So this is whoever is instructing the student's field seminar course, and they're going to be a main point of contact for you throughout the placement. As you get close to an internship period starting, the faculty field liaison will reach out to you to introduce themselves so you know who that person is, kind of give you some dates and overlays for the year so you know. And then there's our field team. So again, Jamie, Savannah, and I, sometimes we have interns working with us in this capacity as well. So we do a lot of the placement process and some of the other kind of field education policy. And so we're always happy to be a contact, but depending on who the liaison is throughout the year, it might be a different person than you were working with during the placement period. All right. Nice. All right, there we go. So just briefly on our supervision requirements. So I mentioned that they need to have that hour a week of supervision from their social work field instructor. And then if they have a site supervisor, Just really making sure that there is general oversight for a student. It's not that they have to be kind of watched and monitored at all times. They can certainly do independent work, but if they are, there at the site and it's not where the field instructor is, we should make sure that somebody is overseeing their work, that they know who to kind of reach out to if they have questions. So again, sometimes we use that dual supervision model where they have a field instructor and also a site supervisor. Sometimes this looks like an external field instructor, and so this is usually a model that we use if there's not a social worker on staff where the student is being placed. And so they might be doing very relevant social work activities at the agency, but there's not a social worker on staff, in which case we are able to match up with a volunteer, generally a volunteer social worker that doesn't work at the agency, that's meeting with the student once a week to provide that educational supervision. If this is something you're ever interested in doing, please reach out to me. I often have students that need this, as social workers are working in different places and work is happening in different places. It is not uncommon that we have students placed in agencies that don't have social workers on staff. So now kind of getting into like what can a social work intern do? And this is a question that we get a lot. So I'm starting here really broad. These are our 9 social work competencies. And so this is what the students have to do, but this language is really broad. It fits in many different settings. And so we really want our students to focus on things related to ethics and professionalism, looking at diversity and human rights, doing some research, looking at policy practice, whether that's internal to the agency, external to, public policies. And then this kind of engage, assess, intervene, and evaluate with the client system, and really emphasizing that that client system, those can be individuals that they're working with, those could be organizations, communities. So they certainly can be in placements where they're not doing direct work with individuals. There are still ways to kind of engage with a community partner and assess that relationship. So that can look a lot of different ways. So again, that's kind of the high level, what can a social work student do? And getting a little bit more specific, things that I like you all to know. Our school has a generalist practice curriculum, and so that really just means that we want our students to practice across that micro, meso, and macro level. So we want them having some exposure to individual work, some exposure to kind of communities and families and groups if possible, and then also looking at that macro. So how do we kind of look at policies? How do we look and see what's impacting us externally? They certainly might be focusing more in one of those areas than others at your setting, but what we really recognize is that particularly in rural areas, but in many places, that social workers need to be able to practice across all of these levels. That, even if you're doing very clinical work, you need to understand how some of the policies that come through might affect your clients and other way around. So we want them to get that broad level of practice in learning different things. We really emphasize that we want our students to both learn and contribute while they're in their placement. So this should be kind of equal value. Like, what does the student want to learn? What are they hoping to get out of this? And what do you need as an agency? We know that there's work that goes into hosting a student. And so we really hope that they are a value added to your organization, in addition to the time that you're going to put into supporting them. So again, that learn and contribute is really important. And then we'll talk more. The students will all create a learning contract. So as far as this kind of what can a social work student do, the learning contract is really going to help with that. And so this is a document where they're going to kind of connect the things that your agency wants them to do, the things that they want to gain, and those competencies that we need them to learn. So kind of a marrying of those 3 priorities kind of comes together in this document, and that helps them kind of map out their plans for the year. And now getting more specific into examples. And I also invite any of you that have had students before that you want to share examples in the chat of things that students have done. Feel free to put those in there to help give people ideas. But these are just some examples. Obviously, kind of that direct client support is a really common thing. Group facilitation, they can do community outreach. Policy updates, these can be great. Do you have manuals or handbooks that need to be updated? Are there any policies that you've considered maybe your agency needs this and doesn't have one? They can develop training materials. They can assess an agency practice. They can audit files. They can do documentation, planning events, fundraisers, and research and assisting with grant applications. I'm currently teaching our financial management and grant class to our grad students this summer, and I really like everyone to know that our students have access to the foundation directory with their WVU login. And so if there's grant research that would be helpful, that's a real rabbit hole kind of activity, and there's a lot of learning there too. So these are, again, just ideas, and they can go on and on, things that you might utilize a student to do. As far as what we don't want our students to do, this list is much smaller. We don't want them to transport clients in their own vehicles. There are very few exceptions to this, but in general, our insurance doesn't cover that, so we tell the students not to do that. We don't want them to engage in activities without adequate training or supervision. So just making sure that they've been trained how to do and that they have support for the activities. Then this other one, kind of taking the place of staff roles to the detriment of student learning. I think that we all recognize that, when you work somewhere and there are needs of the organization, that often comes first. And that's kind of one of the benefits of being in this learner role, that yes, we want them to meet the roles of the organization, but we also want to prioritize their student learning. So just kind of holding those in equal balance. I also kind of mention here like menial work that's unconnected to learning in large quantity. So, anyone can make copies, anyone can make coffee, anyone can do some, light household or house cleaning items. And so in many small organizations, everybody does this sort of thing. And we're happy for our students to kind of be part of that. We just don't want them spending a lot of time on things that don't have learning at the heart of it. Then I want to give you just kind of a brief overview of our curriculum, because again, the point of field education here is that they're able to kind of connect the things that they're learning in the classroom to what they're seeing in your organizations, and ask questions about that. So you having a sense of what they're learning is helpful. So our BSW students, they're going to complete the majority of their kind of social work classes throughout their junior and senior years, and they're in internship during their senior years. So some of the classes that they, either have taken or will be taking concurrently are social welfare policy. They have a methods 1, 2, 3 that focuses across that micro, meso, and macro. They have a human behavior in the social environment, a research and statistics course, and then an interprofessional social justice practice. So again, this is one of the ways that I encourage you to think about that educational part of supervision, is to encourage them to talk a little bit about any of their class assignments and how they're seeing that correlation. What are things that they've learned in class? What are they seeing it look like in your placement? Can they bring some examples in? Then looking at our MSW kind of regular standing. So again, that first year MSW for students that have undergraduate and something else, these courses are going to kind of mirror the BSW courses, just on a graduate level. So similarly, they're going to have a professional identity and social justice. That's one of their first classes where they're really kind of learning, like, what is it to be a social worker? What is this profession about? They have their human behavior and social environment. Again, that generalist practice kind of across the micro, meso, and macro. They have a research course, a policy course, and then looking at this rural community practice. Then we get into our advanced year. So all of our MSW students will be taking these courses generally either before or concurrently with their advanced level internships. And so again, this is where they're at the level where they can do some clinical work, if that's the sort of work that your agency does. So they will have taken an assessment and diagnosis class. They'll take a practice with individuals. But we also, again, as part of this advanced generalist, we want them to have a wide array of courses. So they are also taking an organizational administration course where they're kind of looking at some nonprofit management and how our organization's structured. They have a families and groups course. Again, a policy course kind of at that higher critical level. They do a financial management and grant writing course. And then they do an evaluation research course, which we'll talk about a little bit more here. So if you are going to have a student in that advanced MSW placement year, so that full 600-hour internship, in their spring semester, they'll be taking this evaluation research, social work 616 is what we call it, where they are going to need to do some sort of research evaluation project that ties into their field placement. So they will work with you as their supervisor to kind of come up with what is something at the agency that they can evaluate. Again, I really hope that this is a value added. I think that program evaluation is one of those things that many of us don't have as much time to do as we might like to. So is there something you've wanted evaluated that the student could work on? And they'll get a lot of feedback and support from their faculty, but they'll also kind of work that in with you. More details will come out about that as we get closer to, as we move through the fall semester. We always do kind of a lunch and learn presentation that we invite all of our advanced level students and their supervisors to come and hear from the instructors and learn a little bit more about that. But this is just kind of one of those pieces that's part of that advanced level internship. To talk briefly about Tavera, and it is now changing its name to Experiential Learning Cloud. This is new for me, but I will just start using that language because that's what you'll see if you're on our site there. So this is our online field management platform. We use this for a few things. So we use it in the placement process. This is our database of agencies. And so if you are looking for students, you are going to have a profile that you've completed with us on Tavera. And that's one of the things the students can go in, they do a zip code search, they can find agencies. We have all of US field instructors complete a field instructor profile form, so we have some of that information. And then we also, this is where students are going to complete all their field documents, so the timesheets and learning contracts, which I'll talk a little bit more about. So you will interface with this Tavera system throughout having a student, again, primarily for their field documentation. So talking a little bit about these field documents, and again, kind of looking at this zoom out picture here, these documents are generally found in mostly all social work internships. So even if you're supervising students from other schools, if you have students from throughout West Virginia or wherever, these are probably documents that you'll also be dealing with for other students. The other thing I really like to emphasize here with the field documents is that it's easy to kind of focus on this in that administrative framework. These are documents that have to be done. They have to be done by a certain date, and we can focus on the kind of how. But really, you can do a lot to help connect these field documents to that educational and supportive side of supervision as well. All the field documents, like they have a broader purpose that students can learn from. And so I'll try to weave that in throughout as I talk about this. And I think that that's something that you can have a lot of influence in helping students understand that their documents are not just boxes they have to check, but they are meant to be learning experiences in and of themselves. Also emphasizing that these documents, they're the student's responsibility. They are their assignments. So they will need involvement and approval from you, but it is the student's responsibility to make sure that you have enough time, that they are letting you know when their due dates are, that, if they have a lack of planning, that doesn't become your emergency. And we really stress that a lot to our students. And as I said at the beginning of the semester, you should receive a welcome email from the faculty member teaching the course that will give you an overview of the due date, so you have that for reference. Oops. All right, so a couple of the field documents we'll talk about. A timesheet is one of the most obvious ones. So students will be tracking their time throughout their internships. They should track time each day, but once a month, they'll run it as a report and send that to you for signature. If you're in that kind of dual supervisory situation where there's a site supervisor that's on site and then a field instructor that's not, it should go to the site supervisor first. We just expect that person is probably seeing the student more close up, and these are due on the 5th of each month. I also think, again, in looking at that kind of educational supervision here, yes, the timesheet needs to be done and it needs to be done on time. But I think that there's a great ways to connect this to professionalism and time management. So having conversations with students about how do you manage time at work? What does this look like for you? Do you have to turn in certain documents for billing requirements? Are there different categories of time that you have to track for your work? And so again, this kind of, it does connect out to broader social work practices when we have to think about what we do, when we do, and why we do, and we might have to submit documents about that by a certain time. Our students are going to pick from categories. There's some kind of broad categories on the timesheet. There's not always right and wrong answers about how they choose to categorize their activity, but this can be a good just kind of learning experience to talk through them. When you look at their timesheet with them, what things did they do? How did they choose to categorize it and why? And just kind of walk through their thought process on that. And if you do have students that are struggling with time management, this can be a really good place to look at that with them. The next document I want to talk about is the learning contract. And so this is going to be completed, early on in the placement, generally within the first 3 to 4 weeks of placement. The student is going to work on this with you and with their field liaison and get this all approved. And so I talked about this a little bit already, but this is really what's going to help the student kind of map out what they're going to do in their internship and what they'll be evaluated on. And so there's a template in the Tavera system, and it starts with the 9 social work competencies, and those are each broken down into practice behaviors. Again, the language here is really broad. so that the students are able to make it fit with your specific placement site. So they're going to fill in specific activities that they're going to do. And again, this is meant to help them kind of connect what are their goals, what are your agency needs, and how do they fit in with those 9 social work competencies. So they're going to put in different examples of things. And for you to really think as the students are filling in these activities, one, are these activities things that are reasonable and realistic for them to do in your setting? If not, then that's probably not the right thing to put in. And also, are the activities that they're putting in there things that are going to really help you to evaluate the student? Because that's a big goal of this document, is to kind of list what are the activities that the students are going to do. And by doing that, you are going to be able to see them practicing and then developing competency, because that's what we're really going to ask you to do, is to evaluate their competency. Not so much do they do all of the things on the learning contract, but through doing those activities, were you able to see, you know, whether or not they are competent in this area? Do they need to practice more? Just doing an activity once doesn't make you competent. So I think that really just kind of focusing on, we're developing this learning contract as a tool, not so much as a checklist. I will say sometimes the students are overwhelmed by the learning contract. The language is really broad. The competencies are really broad. And so really helping them to understand, again, how does this connect to broader social work practice? We all have to be able to set goals. Goal setting is a really important social work skill. And evaluating our progress on a goal is also a really important social work skill. So helping them see how developing this learning contract is similar to maybe creating a client treatment plan or creating a program plan or a strategic plan, that we do planning and goal setting a lot as social workers. And this is one way for them to practice. So even building this learning contract is practice in and of itself. And so the way this kind of works logistically, and again, we'll go through this quickly and then we'll provide some more details as your students are working on this. They should be filling in activities through those. They should be talking with you and sharing that with you. So they're going to do this on our Tavera site. Once they fill that all in, they're going to submit it to their field faculty liaison, who will review it. A lot of times we're going to send it back to the student with a few corrections. You know, we might tell them there are areas they need to make more specific. We need to know how this is going to be observed. So we're going to make sure it's kind of meeting our criteria. And once it looks like that's good, then we're going to kind of send it through. So everybody will sign it. Our hope is that by the time we've signed it, and approved it, you've already looked at it with the students, so that it's not the first time you're seeing it. But if for some reason it comes to you for signature and you haven't seen it yet, you can also kind of click changes requested and send it back to the students so that they can work through that with you. But we'll really coach them on making sure that they are working through that building process with you. We do want the practice behaviors to be specific and observable. For those of you that are going to have generalist students, there are now drop downs on there. So the students will say an activity. So maybe they'll say, I will complete research on expanding services to marginalized groups. And then they're going to click from a drop down that's going to say things like, and I'll discuss this in supervision, and I'll create a usable document related to this, and I will attend an event. So there's something that you can see. They also can fill in their own. By the advanced, we are hoping that the students are able to make that observable on their own, but you'll get to see what that looks like, and that's helped our students to have those drop down menus there. So the next document that the students are completing are reflection logs. You are not necessarily going to see these reflection logs. These are things that the students are filling out monthly and they're coming back to their field faculty liaison. It's pushing them to identify some of the activities they've engaged on and reflect on them. So we're asking them to identify feelings and values, help make some connection to theory, identify some room for growth, some connection to diversity and self-care strategies. You can certainly talk through these with students. And many of the times when they kind of make that verifiable part of their learning contract, they might say, you know, I'm going to do something and then I will, you know, do a written reflection on it. And so you can certainly ask them to share some of their reflections with you, but we also give them this space so that this is just coming to faculty and they're reflecting on it there. But we like you to know that this is something that the students are doing, and we encourage you to ask them about it. And then I also really like to give you all license to assign other things that will help you evaluate your students. You can assign reflections, you can have them develop memos, you can have them make presentations, review articles. work on a genogram, do a process recording, really whatever makes sense in your setting. You have license to kind of give your students assignments that you want them to do to help with that supervision process. You don't have to, but I really like to emphasize this is you are the community educator in this space, and if there are things that would help you to see them kind of bringing some work back to supervision, that's certainly within your realm to do. Then looking at assessment. So we set that learning contract up. That's going to help set us up for assessment. We do an assessment midway through the placement and final at the end of the placement. And so this goes through a process. Again, it's built into our Tavera system. The students will do a self-assessment first, and it's going to pull those tasks right from their learning contract. So whatever it is that they said they were going to do under each competency, that will pull through. And we ask the students to kind of reflect on, did they do the thing that their learning contract told them, or maybe something changed and they did something else that still fell within that competency, and that lets you kind of discuss that with them. Do you really want them to do the thing that they originally agreed on, or did a different activity meet that competency and that makes more sense at the time? That's one of the ways we allow the learning contract to be kind of a living document. Because again, really emphasizing that what is important here is that you are evaluating the level of competence, not so much, did they do the 18 things that they said they would do on the learning contract. We want them to develop competency in all of those areas. So again, they're going to go through that assessment. They're going to tell you, did they do the thing? And then they're going to kind of give some details, like what did I do that helped me demonstrate competency in this area? And then they'll do a self-rating, and then you will get that and you will do a rating. If you are working with a site supervisor and a field instructor, we really encourage you to talk together if you're able to and kind of get one another's perspective on what you're seeing, because you'll be seeing different things. But if that is the case, it will go first after the student completes theirs. It goes to the site supervisor for them to include any of their feedback, and then finally to the social work field instructor to fill in theirs. The midterm is really a checkpoint. We want to see how students are doing at this point in time. It comes back to the field faculty liaison. We're kind of laying eyes on it. We don't expect that they are kind of at passing marks on all of their competencies by the middle of the internship. We expect that there's probably a lot that they still have to learn. So again, I think that we really try to set the students up for that too. Like it is a 1 through 5 scale, but if you have some 1s and 2s at your midterm, that's okay. There are probably areas you haven't worked on yet. There are areas you're still growing in. So again, it's really important to give some of that honest feedback all the way through and on that midterm assessment, so we get an accurate point in time of where the student is. If, as you're doing the midterm, you're really having concerns that the student is not going to make adequate progress on some of these competencies by the end of the internship, that's a good time to talk with the field liaison so we can problem solve together. We are expecting that by the end of the internship, they're kind of at least at that 3, that midpoint in all of their competencies. And so again, if you're at the point where you're like, oh, I don't know if we're going to be there by the end, we want to have a conversation about that so we can try to support or catch things early if need to be. But again, at that midpoint, it's really important just to get an accurate kind of snapshot in time of where students are. The final field assessment will go through the very same process. So it's kind of the same document. It's going to pull the learning contract tasks. It will also show all the ratings from the midterm. So you'll be able to see, where were they and where are they now? Similar process, the student will do their self-assessment first, then the site supervisor, if applicable, and then the field instructor. And so as I mentioned, that we do expect them to kind of be at that 3 or higher at each practice behavior by the very end of their internship. And so at any point in the internship, if you're concerned that that isn't going to happen, or you're not kind of sure if that's appropriate, then reach out to the field faculty liaison. We want to support you and the student in kind of figuring out how to best address that. I also really want to stress that with these assessments, I think one of the changes I've seen as we moved away from paper and to an electronic system is that sometimes everybody can do theirs online, and then there's not always a conversation about it. Whereas like when we used to bring a piece of paper to our supervisor to evaluate us, we always had a conversation about it. So really just stressing to you the value of having that conversation about the evaluations. It's really a valuable point to give feedback and to model for students how we give and receive feedback. And it can be a good space to kind of accept that multi-directional feedback. Are there things that the student is hoping to learn that they haven't gotten to do yet? So those are just really good conversations, both midpoint and at the end, as you're kind of beginning that termination process, to really talk through what are the strengths, what was developed, and what are things that the student should keep working on. And so I want to talk also about problem solving. Many of the internships will go really smoothly, but sometimes things don't go quite as planned, or we're just not quite sure. So we use a 5-phase problem solving process. We try to be really involved and supportive with you on the ground, and we would like to catch things early when possible. So we're never going to leave you on your own to deal with these things. We'll work with you side by side. We really stress that it's helpful for us to know sooner rather than later if you're having concerns. We don't want to wait until the point that you've had enough and you're ready to let this intern go. We want to be working with you on it to avoid that if possible, or at least if we get to a point of terminating an internship, then we've had a number of conversations along the way. So again, really effort made to avoid terminating a placement unless absolutely necessary. And this is an opportunity for us really, again, to kind of demonstrate to students how we go about proactively problem solving with open communication. So again, I know my graphic isn't the best here, but Jamie's just put our problem solving process, which is in our handbook. So just to kind of briefly walk through each of these steps, and we really address this the same, whether it's you bringing a concern to us or a student bringing a concern about their placement. The first thing we want to make sure is that there's been a direct conversation between the student and the supervisor. If our students are coming to us with a concern, that's always our first question, is like, well, have you yet talked to your field instructor about this? Oftentimes a direct conversation will clear up a problem. So that's that first step really. And again, we often don't even know we're in a problem solving process when we're having that first conversation, but just addressing something openly and again, on your end, really modeling that. When we have a concern, let's bring it up directly and see if it resolves the problem. If that doesn't resolve the problem, then consulting with the field faculty liaison, letting them know about what's going on, that you've already talked about it, but it's still happening. The field faculty liaison is there as a resource and a support, might kind of brainstorm, put it, give a perspective, give some suggestions, and then encourage that another direct conversation happens with the student and the field instructor to kind of try to address. If that doesn't resolve it, then we'll schedule a meeting with the liaison and the supervisor and the student all together to kind of address what's going on. At this point, we try to make it very clear that we are having a meeting because we are problem solving. We want to be clear that there is a concern, we're trying to fix it, but that's the reason we're having this meeting. We try to put a plan in place. Here are some expectations that we expect to be different by a certain period of time in order for us to feel like we're moving forward. At that point, I'm always notified as the field director. Again, hopefully that addresses the problem, but if we move forward with that process, then we would have a meeting with myself as the director and the field liaison and the student and the supervisor. This meeting is kind of elevated in seriousness, where we're really saying, hey, this is kind of a last effort to salvage this placement, and these are some very specific things that need to have changed by whatever point. A pretty quick turnaround at that point. Otherwise, we're in danger of the placement terminating. And then if that doesn't resolve, then we generally do reach the termination of placement. Again, very rarely do we make it through all 5 of these stages. Usually we're able to address things along the way, but we like you all to know that we do have this process in place. It generally works pretty well. And again, we are happy to be involved with you on the early side because again, we are at a struggle if we don't hear from you. If by the time we've heard from you that there's a problem, you're fed up and you don't want to go through a couple more meetings, then it's harder for us to support the student in trying to address it. So now kind of transitioning to some of these broader practices. As you even consider bringing in an intern and you have this interview process, thinking about, what do you want students to know about you and your agency? What sort of expectations do you have? How would a student make an informed decision about this being a good site for them? And then similarly, what are you looking for? What skills and interests are important? What learning styles are going to work well with your supervisory style? And then a little bit more logistically, talking through clearances, pre-internship trainings, if there's trainings or certificates they need to have in advance, if there's background checks or clearances that they need to have in advance, making sure that those are talked about. up front. It can also be valuable to talk through scheduling up front, getting a sense of like what is their class schedule, what sort of schedule is going to work for them. Similarly, with like holiday breaks from classes, we don't require our students to be in field over kind of like semester breaks, but they are allowed to. And so we really encourage them and you to have that conversation ahead of time. If it's really important for you that the student is not taking 4 weeks off in between December and January semesters, that's something that's okay, but you have to be upfront with them about that to make sure that that's going to work. That tends to come up in more clinical placements where students might have a caseload. If it's okay for them to have that break, that is fine. And some of the students would be happy to continue on and they don't want to take that whole break. So again, we have a lot of flexibility, but it's important that you have a good conversation with them about that. Then kind of thinking about agency orientation. So your intern gets started. How do you get them oriented to place? And so we've put together a orientation packet guide that you can use, and that's I think Appendix G in our field handbook. And so just things to consider, what are there things that you want to give them to read? Are there policy and procedure manuals? Is there a formal orientation? Especially some of our larger organizations, there might be a formal orientation that you want them to go to. Do you want them to schedule meetings with some specific relevant staff? Are there articles that you want them to review, having them do a website review? And if you don't have kind of a formal process for this, what I often do when I have a student intern coming in, I make just kind of a document and it has links to different things and some different steps. And I'm telling them, I want you to schedule a meeting with this person and this person. Maybe I want you to write a bio about yourself. I want you to kind of go explore. That's a really helpful thing also to be able to give to them. Because thinking about that first day, they're not going to have their own work to do yet. If you're in a setting where they can shadow you all day, great. But if you're in a setting where maybe some of your work is more administrative and it's not going to be that interesting for them to sit with you while you're at your computer doing whatever you're doing, then it's good to have some things to give them so that you don't feel like you need to be like actively occupying their time, but they have some things that they can do to get kind of acclimated. Other things to think about setting up in advance, physical space, if they're on site with you, where are they going to be? What office space do they have access to? Is there an agency email address that can be set up for them? Is there access to different keys, ID cards, technology? Is there like a secure drive? Just really kind of thinking through what are the tools that they're going to need for success. Some of these things take a little while to process. So doing your best so that when they walk in on that first day that they feel welcome and expected. That really goes a long way in setting people up for success. And then just kind of transitioning into this, ongoing supervision, some best practices. So regularly scheduled meetings are really key. So I've talked about this kind of 1 hour a week of educationally focused supervision. Having that as a consistent meeting on the calendar is really important. I know that one of the questions we get frequently from students and supervisors is saying, maybe we share an office, maybe we're together all the time. It doesn't feel necessary to have this kind of like sit down meeting that's separate than that. And I really encourage you to do that anyways. Even if you are together all the time, there's a lot of value in this kind of structured formal meeting. It does a few things. One, it sets an opportunity for the student to prepare for that supervision. It also allows them to practice prioritization. So, how do you decide which levels of questions are urgent and you need to come find your supervisor and ask them right away, and which levels of questions are not urgent and they're just fine to put on your agenda and plan to talk through for supervision. And so regularly scheduled supervision lets students kind of practice that. Also, as we've mentioned, that this kind of educational supervision needs some extra intention. Having that regularly scheduled time really allows that intention. Whereas if it's just kind of supervision happening kind of all the time without as much structure, sometimes we miss that. So I really strongly encourage that regular scheduled time. I also find for myself, if it's on my calendar and I have to cancel it, then I'm going to reschedule it because I had to move it off my calendar. So the good, all of those things. Things, really having some very clear and specific expectation conversations. If your student is sick and can't come to work one day, how do you want them to contact you? What is the process? In some settings, texting is fine, in others it's not. So just being really clear, like what do you expect? What do you expect for lunch? What are some of those kind of organizational rules and culture? How do you want the student to communicate with you? What kind of works best for you? So again, just kind of going over some of those specific expectations. And then in this ongoing way, clear and consistent feedback. So we've talked about the evaluation process and that it happens at midterm and finals, but it shouldn't just happen then. We should be giving feedback, again, mutual feedback in both ways throughout our interactions, and having that culture of ongoing feedback makes those formal evaluations not so stressful. I know when I teach our administrative classes, students always talk about evaluations as being one of the kind of scariest things that they think about doing. And I think a lot of us have this impression of evaluation sessions being really negative, but I think that if we do a good job in having that communication all the way along, then it doesn't have that kind of scary formal feeling. And again, you have the space to kind of model what that can look like for a student. And then also in supervision, really having that space to explore the why. Why are things done a certain way? You know, what theories are they seeing? What things are they reading in their textbooks that are looking similar or different in agencies? And really letting them kind of ask those questions and get in that kind of critical thinking. You know, maybe I'm learning about this and I see it looking differently here at the agency, and really getting into the why and making sure that they feel safe to question practices. That's a big part of their learning, is to be able to question practices. I encourage you to use some sort of agenda for your students to fill out. I will, after the training, we'll send out the slides, and I will also share some sample agendas you can use. These can be done in a lot of different ways. I've experimented with a few different ones, but I find having a template for an agenda and having my students fill those out in advance, again, it helps, especially with that educational piece of supervision, to make sure we're not just talking about what happened through the week and why, but really getting into some of those other pieces. So having some specific prompts, you know, what theory could you connect this week? What did you learn in class this semester that you saw at play? So having some of those questions in that template will really help. Other things for you to think about in this supervisory relationship, you know, what are things that you want your student to know about you? Giving them kind of some overview of your professional background. You know, how did you get into social work? How did you end up where you are now? What are things that you think that you might want to do? Getting them, having that understanding of you as a social worker really helps them, as one of the things they're really trying to develop is their own kind of professional sense of being a social worker. I really stress to our students that they're not in their field placements to be in an apprenticeship. They're not there just to learn how to work in your agency, but they're learning how to be a social worker. And so seeing you and in your kind of professional journey can really help them with that. Helping them understand your current role within the agency, having conversations about supervision style and preferences in both directions. What works well for them? What works well for you? And then taking that time also to get to know your students. What are some of their prior experiences? What are they bringing? You know, what are they seeing through their lens? Who are they and how are they experiencing this? Learning about their learning styles, their professional goals, and again, kind of getting back to that professional identity, that learning how to kind of be a professional social worker, whether it's working with the population that you currently are or transferring those skills elsewhere, is really crucial. We have virtual considerations here, and I think that, you know, this looks a lot of different ways. I think one of the things that we've all seen, you know, especially kind of post-COVID years, is that many people are now working in a hybrid capacity. There are certainly still are settings where everyone's in the office every day, but there are a lot of hybrid capacity jobs. And so we really are allowing our students to work in whatever capacity the agency does. So if you're all on site every day and that's where you want your student to do their work, that's perfectly acceptable. But if it makes sense in your capacity for them to be doing some of their work remotely, that's also fine. We just want you to have your clear conversations with them. You know, how often are they working remotely? What sorts of things are they doing remotely? We do have some internships that are entirely remote, and so we have some kind of guidance on that as well, but most commonly is some sort of hybrid blend. And so again, just having that clear conversation about what, when, how often, what sort of schedule. These are really important things, really stressing to students that working remotely doesn't mean just kind of working little bits here and there, but it's still important to have kind of structure and schedule. If it makes sense to do supervision virtually, that is allowable. Video-enabled supervision is strongly recommended. We all know that body language goes a long way. And so while, on the phone supervision could be acceptable every now and then, that isn't what we want as the regular. But also having some of those expectations. So if you're interacting in virtual space, and whether that's interacting with you as a supervisor, whether your students are interacting with clients, making sure that you're having clear conversations. They don't necessarily have a framework for having done this before. So things like making sure that they're in a private space, that they have consistent internet access, that they have reliable technology. These are really important things to talk through. And then also boundaries. And this goes a lot of ways, whether we're virtual or not. But, this conversation about like responding to emails, I've seen students struggle with this on both sides of this spectrum. So our interns are all here in a part-time capacity. Even if they're doing a full-time school, they're still only with you like 20 hours a week. So they're not working full-time. I really stress to my students, I don't expect you to be emailing me back on days that you're not working here. I don't want them to be in the culture of checking their email all the time. I think that many of us have habits where we are kind of too connected, and I really try to help students develop some good boundaries with that. So talking about, when are your working hours and when aren't they, and what are my expectations as far as responding to email, but also on the other way, I do expect you to respond to my email. So again, having that conversation either way, and then that kind of conversation about how are they communicating with clients. So if they are reaching out to clients from their own spaces, what mechanisms are in place to ensure confidentiality? So setting up separate emails, having separate phone lines. So if they're using their own phone, making sure that they have access to kind of create a separate phone number, that there's a lot to discuss around boundaries and confidentiality. So again, if you have students that are working outside of your office, just making sure that you're having really clear conversations about these things. Related to adult learners, just some kind of good concepts for us to consider. We've talked a lot about this learner center. So learning who our student is, what interests them, even doing this learning contract. These are all things that help us kind of place the learner at the center of structuring their internship. Having this two-way feedback. So, making sure we're giving our students feedback, but giving them space to talk with us. All of these things kind of help us respect adult learners. And then similarly, moving on to kind of culturally sensitive supervision, I have a quote here from our code of ethics, that social workers should demonstrate awareness and cultural humility by engaging in critical self-reflection, understanding our own bias and engaging in self-correction, and recognizing clients as experts of their own culture, committing to lifelong learning. And so I think that this is a good space for us to recognize our students as experts of their own culture, and having that space to talk about cultural differences that there might be between you and your student, and how does that impact the way that we both work with clients, and that we both, come about being a social worker, and what does that look like for us? This is always a great space for us to reflect on our own development. What strategies do we need to do to continue cultural competence, cultural humility? These are lifelong things. And so bringing students into our journey with this can be really valuable. Good things to consider, how open are you to being educated by staff or students about cultural injustice? This is something our students are talking about a lot in the classroom. Sometimes they're not so comfortable talking about an internship. So if you're able to, try to create space to talk critically about that. And this is especially essential right now. There are obviously policies that are changing, programs have been impacted. If there are things that your agency is or has done differently due to recent policies, having those conversations with students about, what are we doing? Why? How do we feel about that? Who is impacted by it? These are all really important learning experiences for our students right now. And then we have some of the principles of trauma-informed supervision here. Many of the practices that we've discussed already incorporate some of these principles, such as collaboration, transparency, having these clear communication about expectations, so not having those kind of hidden rules, but really being explicit about what we do and don't expect. Using self-disclosure and helping students understand when do we and don't we use self-disclosure, and then validating and partnering with our students. Internship can be an overwhelming period of time. Being in school can be overwhelming. Many of our students are also working. They may also have caretaking responsibilities. So just kind of validating students through the experience that they're going through, and partnering with them can really go a long way in incorporating these principles. I know a lot of content, so trying to get through here. Self-care is something that we talk about a lot at school, and this is an area that I really want to ask you to help our students come out with good habits and self-care, help them lean into this. So I have, again, looking at the 2021 updates in the Code of Ethics regarding self-care, really was kind of putting the emphasis for the need for educational institutions and organizations to shift the culture of self-care. So for it to be less about, is it your fault if you're not doing a good job with self-care, and really putting more emphasis on how do we as a school build this into our students? How do our workplaces create this culture? And so this is a good space for you to be reflecting on your own agency's self-care culture. What does it look like at your agency? Can you have a conversation with your student about that? Reflecting on your own self-care practices. Is this something that you feel good enough and you feel a strength in, or is it an area that you really want to work on? So really doing that reflection yourself can help you work with students on these. I really like to emphasize a lot to students too about, there's personal self-care and there's professional self-care. And self-care is a lot more and different than, answers that I get are, taking a bubble bath, scrolling through social media. Like, these can be ways to decompress, but that's not the same as self-care. And so having good supervision, having good time management, these are things that can be really good self-care. Setting boundaries away from work and home. And so really kind of just getting into this with students. How can you guide new social workers in establishing healthy habits? And how can you think critically about what self-care does and doesn't look like, both for you and in your workplace? And then just to kind of normalize, these are kind of common stages of an internship. And so this anticipation stage beforehand, we're excited, we're nervous, we get there, we get started, we might kind of be in a honeymoon stage. And so just helping to kind of define goals, get oriented, these things help us move through that anticipation stage. Then this disillusionment stage, this is common. And I think that when we think about starting new jobs, we can relate to this, that, we might think, here's all these wonderful things, and then we get in there and not everything is so wonderful. Never are we going to love every single thing about any job that we have, and that's normal. And so helping to kind of validate that experience for our students. Some things are going to be different than they expected. How do we acknowledge those gaps? And then we can kind of move through that confrontation. So we're going to get through this. We're going to work together. We're going to learn more about, what can and can't we control. And then towards the end of the internship, we get into this competence. So we now have a good understanding of what we do like, what we don't like, what we can manage, how we often see students developing their competence and confidence. Those kind of things rise at the same time. And then we get to the end, and it's time to kind of recap, evaluate, and move through a termination placement from our internship. So again, that's just kind of a normal trajectory, but like any shift, they don't always go through in a linear fashion. I like to close by just encouraging you to do some of your own reflection. How was your own field experience? What was your relationship like with your field instructor? How was their supervisory schedule style? What was helpful? What wasn't? How do you want to be? So that, I know I always get rushed at the end. I have contact information here. I have space for